Hello and welcome to the State of the Fleet Industry, a weekly video series produced by Automotive Fleet magazine and which is sponsored by Enterprise Fleet Management. My name is Mike Antich. I'm the editor of Automotive Fleet, and today I'd like to examine what's occurring in the fleet industry for the week of March 8th, 2021. And as I prepared for this presentation, there was a lyric from a very old song that came to mind, which goes, "Second verse, same as the first." And what I mean by that is what's occurring in today's market is pretty much the same as what's been occurring in the past weeks and months, and will most likely be occurring in the future weeks and months. First, vehicle supply constraints are continuing, and you don't need to be a fortune teller to predict that they're going to be continuing into the future weeks. And there's a lot of reason why these supply constraints are persisting, and I'll get into some of those reasons later on in my presentation. But simply knowing the reasons why these constraints are persisting doesn't help fleet managers because they're the ones who are struggling to cope with the situation in the here and now. You know, fleet managers are valued by their companies because of their ability to source the right assets at the right time in the most cost-effective way. But nowadays, getting a vehicle where it needs to be and when it needs to be there has become problematic for many fleet managers. And as we look back on the month of February, both retail and fleet sales were down compared to same time last year. And there are a variety of reasons why this occurred, ranging from fewer retail sales days to the severe weather conditions, especially as we saw recently in Texas, which, by the way, accounts for nearly 1 out of every 11 vehicles sold in this country. But in the larger scheme of things, these are all short-term impacts. You know, although dealer inventories are tight, retail demand continues to be strong. So it's a great time to be a dealer. And on the fleet side, commercial sales are down about 15% or so. But how much is this attributed to the fact of our early order cutoffs, to the lost production due to the microchip shortage, and to the dealer-driven dynamics between retail versus fleet allocations for high-demand products such as pickups and SUVs? On the whole, commercial fleets have remained remarkably steady considering everything that we've gone through in this pandemic. And since most fleets operate on set replacement cycles, fleet demand is continuing to be steady and perhaps even way stronger than we anticipated when we were in the early days of the pandemic. But there are drags on fleet production, and in particular, the ongoing microchip shortage. And as I researched the root cause of this microchip shortage, because I've never experienced it before, it's the first time that I've seen it during the course of my career in fleet. It appears that the catalyst that brought this all about was when the pandemic forced the OEMs to temporarily shut down all of their North American assembly plants from mid-March to mid-May. And as a result, the OEMs and their tier one suppliers drastically cut their semiconductor purchases to avoid excess inventory when the plants ultimately did reopen. But at the same time, all of this was occurring in the auto industry. Chip demand from consumer electronics companies is actually increasing, which allowed the semiconductor manufacturers now to reallocate this chip production to them, the consumer electronics companies. But when the auto industry did reopen its factories, to everyone's surprise, the pent up demand for new vehicles was much larger and quicker than anyone anticipated. And the semiconductor manufacturers didn't have the capacity now to reallocate sufficient production back to the auto companies to meet their increased demand. Hence, the root causes for our production constraints. But the forecast for the shortage of microchips is that it will be alleviated soon. By the time we start the second half of the calendar year, this shortage should be behind us. So we all hope that this does come about. Next, I'd like to switch gears and take a moment and discuss fuel prices, which automotive fleet readers have been getting back to us very vocally and saying that they're much higher than what's being reported in the nationwide average prices. And here's some examples of two emails that were sent to me. So to quote the first one, the reported average gasoline prices are a lie. I have records of gas receipts from January 21 to February 22nd. The price of gas in the Phoenix area went up a whopping 50 cents. And here's another email that I quote. These reported average gasoline prices are BS. The price per gallon in North Carolina is $3.38. And fuel reporting companies such as Gas Buddy, they're doubling down on their earlier forecasts and they're predicting that there's now a 70% probability that the national average gasoline prices will reach $3 per gallon by Memorial Day. And this would be at a level that we haven't seen in fleet since 2014. And the primary reason that they give for this escalation in fuel prices is due to the decreased fuel inventory caused by the earlier OPEC decision not to increase crude oil production. And, it's not like we haven't seen this picture before because we have. And we know when fuel consumption increases and there's a lower fuel inventory available, it puts upward pressure on future fuel prices. But there's a lot more going on in the fleet industry beyond just these developments. So let me highlight a couple of other noteworthy announcements. The first one is that FedEx, which is, as we all know, the nation's second largest private fleet, announced that it's going to be carbon neutral by the year 2040. So, to achieve this goal, FedEx is planning to make its entire delivery fleet all electric. So, the way they're going to go about doing this is starting in 2025, 50% of all FedEx's new vehicle purchases will be all electric, and this is going to increase to 100% of new vehicle purchases by the year 2030. And then in those following 10 years, by attrition, it's going to retire the remainder of its fossil fuel vehicles to achieve its carbon neutral goal. And the second big announcement that occurred last week is that it looks like Hertz Global Holdings is getting closer to exiting Chapter 11 bankruptcy, as there are now two competing plans to do so. One is from a coalition of unsecured creditors, and the second plan is from a travel industry focused investment fund that's been created by Knighthead Capital Management and Centauri's Management. But ultimately, who's the final decider on this will be the bankruptcy court, and they're going to determine the route to go. So we'll have to see how that plays out, but there appears for Hertz to be light at the end of this Chapter 11 bankruptcy tunnel. So with that said, I'd like to conclude my State of the Fleet industry presentation for the week of March 8th, 2021, and I'd like to thank you for listening.